Gareth Thomas.
Thank you, Mr Rosendale. I wanted to congratulate the honourable gentleman for securing this, what has been so far a very interesting debate, and just take the opportunity to gently remind the House of the promise the Secretary of State made to have signed some 40 free trade deals by the end of March 2019. Which, not surprisingly, has not been achieved, and we are some way away from seeing those 40 so-called rollover EU trade agreements signed. That is an indication of the complexity of trade, and whilst there are, as the Honourable Lady opposite alluded to, many reasons that can affect future trading opportunities for British businesses, the instability of not having proper trade agreements with both the European Union and other key markets sorted out is likely to inhibit the international trading opportunities for British businesses. I wanted to raise in particular concerns about the trade in services going forward, because the vast majority of the jobs that my constituents do that directly involve international trade do so in terms of trade in services. And the few bits of detailed thinking from independent trade experts about the impact of Brexit on trade in services highlights the huge significance of trade in services between the UK and the EU, and therefore what's at risk in terms of scale for the UK economy from any inhibitions of trade in services. In 2017, services, according to the Centre for European Reform, accounted for some 45% of total UK exports, or almost £300 billion. The EU received 40% of those exports, the highest proportion of any UK trading partner. And research by the Centre for European Reform suggests that if Britain leaves the single market, and trades services under the provisions of an ambitious free trade agreement, UK exports to the EU of financial services will nonetheless be 60% lower on an annual basis. UK exports of insurance and pension services, as I alluded to, would be almost 20% lower on an annual basis, and exports of other business services, including law, accountancy and professional services, would be some 10% lower. Now, these are all sectors in which Britain has a significant comparative advantage. So jobs, investment and tax revenues are all at risk from withdrawal from the single market. Yeah.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for giving me that, because that leads on to the point the member from North Warwickshire was making earlier. And the stats that he's just given there are those that lead into the 6% damage to GDP. And when I pointed out that you need the American deal will be 30 or 40, and he said we can, more countries, more deals. The only problem is the USA is a quarter of the world's GDP, meaning you need 7 to 8 to 10 planets to make up for the damage of that he's just citing at the moment that the UK is inflicting on itself with Brexit.
Well, the honourable gentleman makes a very good point. Let me just, if I may, without dwelling on the point that he's made, with which I agree, go on to point out that the CER report very helpfully points out that it is significantly more difficult to open services markets than goods markets to trade, because many of the barriers to trade are regulatory in nature. The quality and safety of a service is difficult to decide at the actual border. And as I pointed out in the original intervention to the honourable gentleman opposite, no other group of countries has gone further than the European Union in making it easier to sell services produced in one country into another in the bloc. Yet still barriers remain. So pulling out of the single market and negotiating a free trade agreement, however ambitious it ultimately is, would inevitably throw up new barriers to trade, particularly if we withdraw from the EU's collective rulebook, shared institutions and cross-border enforcement regimes, as it appears the Prime Minister wants. Some of the impact of withdrawal from the single market for services could be offset with, for example, significant mutual recognition of qualifications, and more controversially, with the temporary movement of people. I appreciate it's not fashionable to worry about the future of financial services, and certainly the case for further regulatory reform of this industry can easily be made. but it remains one of the few world-class industries that we have in the UK, and it is clear it is set to be significantly damaged, putting jobs in my constituency at risk. And it is for that reason that I urge the House to vote for us to stay in the single market as part of a soft Brexit deal, put back to the British people in a public vote, with the option, nevertheless, to remain in the EU.
I call Faisal Rashid. However, may I ask the honourable member to keep his remarks fairly short?